They say New Mexico has a light unlike anywhere else in the country, warm, golden, and slow, the kind of light that lingers in the late afternoon and wraps around rooftops like a soft blanket. In the quiet suburb of South Valley, just outside Albuquerque, that light shone gently over the Carter family home, a modest one-story house with a pale blue roof and wind chimes that never stopped singing. Madeline Carter grew up there. And for much of her life, that home felt like the safest place in the world. Born in 1990, Madeline was the only daughter of John and Denise Carter, a couple who had weathered more than their share of storms, financial hardship, layoffs, and the long, slow decline of John's health after years working in construction. But through it all, they remained grounded. They raised Madeline and her two younger brothers, Bryce and Eli, with equal parts discipline and tenderness. Denise stayed home to raise the kids. She kept a garden, made every meal from scratch, and never missed a parent-teacher conference. John, although gruff and quiet, built tree houses by hand and taught Madeline how to change a tire before she learned how to parallel park. They weren't a wealthy family, but they had something rarer: stability, patience, and love without conditions. From a young age, Madeline was the kind of girl who made people stop and listen, not because she was loud, but because she was thoughtful. Teachers described her as quiet brilliance. She wasn't the one raising her hand every minute, but when she did speak, everyone paid attention. She was gentle, deeply empathetic, and far older in spirit than her years would suggest. She loved helping people. It wasn't performative, it was instinct. If a classmate forgot lunch, she'd quietly offer her own sandwich. If someone was crying in the hallway, Madeline was the first to kneel beside them. And more than anything, she had a deep fascination with nutrition. By the time she was in high school, she'd already started keeping a food journal, not to count calories, but to track nutrients, effects on mood, energy levels. She volunteered at a local clinic in Albuquerque that ran free community wellness classes. There, she helped translate materials into Spanish, organized food drives, and asked the clinic dietitians so many questions that they finally gave her her own desk and a stack of outdated textbooks to study. Madeline didn't dream of fame or money. Her dream was simple: to help families like hers make healthier lives with the resources they had. She knew what it meant to grow up on tight budgets, powdered milk, and dollar store cereals. But she also knew it didn't have to stay that way, that food could be healing even in the smallest ways. Her parents, especially Denise, supported her completely. When Madeline got into University of Arizona, majoring in nutritional science, Denise cried. Not out of sadness, but pride, that her daughter, the one who had once made banana muffins for the whole neighborhood, was going to be the first in the family to earn a degree. So in the fall of 2009, Madeline packed her few belongings into a used Honda Civic and drove down I-25, crossing the New Mexico border into Tucson, Arizona, where a new chapter of her life awaited. She kept in touch constantly, video calls every Sunday night, care packages from home every month, even the occasional long emotional email to her brothers, reminding them to be nice to mom and take out the trash. She sent photos of the cacti-lined campus, of her new favorite cafe near campus, and even a short video of her first hands-on lab measuring macronutrient breakdowns in patient diets. Life was moving forward. Madeline was growing, expanding, thriving. But as is so often the case in stories like these, there was a moment, small and quiet, where everything began to shift. It happened during her sophomore year. She was working part-time at a small juice bar and cafe near campus called Green Table. That's where she met Victor Ramirez, a man who came in one afternoon and ordered a kale smoothie with almond butter, then stayed for an hour talking to her about turmeric, metabolism, and gut health. He was older, mid-30s. Confident. Smooth. He told her he used to work in kitchens in San Diego, had dreams of opening his own organic eatery in Tucson. He asked questions about her degree, her philosophy on wellness, what she thought was the most misunderstood nutrient. He made her feel intelligent, not in a condescending way, but like her opinions truly mattered. He came back the next day. And the next. At first, Madeline didn't think much of it. He was just a customer. But the conversations grew longer. He complimented her calm presence, her depth. He told her he could see she had an old soul. He said she was different, not like other college girls. And for a young woman like Madeline, raised to be generous, kind, and understanding, the attention felt like warmth after a cold day. Victor made her feel seen in a way no one else had. Within 2 months, they were dating. Her friends were cautious. Some called it strange. One roommate, Candace, later told police that Victor gave her the creeps, not because he was overtly aggressive, but because he seemed to always be watching. Always calculating. He made her feel like she needed to be protected, Candace said. But from what? He was the danger. Madeline, of course, didn't see it. At least not yet. Victor introduced her to his friends, few, but loyal. He cooked for her, brought her flowers, left notes in her bag. When she told her mom about him, she glossed over the age gap. He's 35, but he doesn't act like it. He really listens to me, Mom. The warning signs were subtle at first. He'd make small comments. I like it better when you don't wear makeup. You don't need to be out so late with those girls. You're always so tired from school, maybe it's time to slow down a little. But Madeline, raised to accommodate and seek peace, saw those comments as concern, not control. Until the spring of 2011, when a pregnancy test came back positive. She was 21. Still in school. Victor proposed within the week. Let's build a life together, he said. We're already a family. Madeline, overwhelmed but hopeful, said yes. She called home with the news. Her parents, stunned, said they would support whatever she chose. And like so many young women in love, Madeline told herself this was the start of something beautiful. Something meant to be. What she didn't realize, what no one could have warned her in time, was that she had just stepped into a story that would unravel everything she had worked so hard to build. A story that would lead not to happily ever after, but to headlines, missing posters, and questions that would haunt a nation. At first, it was easy to believe it was love. After the whirlwind romance that began at the Small Juice Cafe in Tucson, Madeline Carter found herself falling for Victor Ramirez faster than anyone, including herself, had expected. He was older, 14 years older. But he was charming, experienced, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd already seen the world and survived it. He told stories about his years working kitchens in San Diego, about the time he catered a party for a famous health guru in Los Angeles, and how he dreamed of starting his own organic food truck chain. To Madeline, a 21-year-old college student studying nutritional science, that all sounded intoxicating. He wasn't like the boys in her biology class or the guys she'd grown up with back in Albuquerque. Victor made her feel seen, heard, and, perhaps most dangerously, needed. That summer, Madeline stayed in Tucson instead of returning home. She and Victor rented a small studio apartment just south of the university. It wasn't glamorous, chipped linoleum floors, creaky plumbing, and only one working ceiling fan, but they called it home. And to Madeline, it was enough. She was building a life. But something began to shift not long after she moved in. It started with the small things. Victor would comment on what she wore. That skirt's a little short, don't you think? Or, you don't need makeup, babe. You're naturally beautiful. At first, Madeline took it as affection. He was just being protective, right? Then came the control over time. You've been spending a lot of time at the lab, he'd say, the voice low but firm. Shouldn't you be relaxing more? For the baby's sake. He began picking her up from campus unannounced. At first, it felt sweet, romantic even. But then it became expected. Then required. And when she said she had study plans, he grew silent. Cold. When she found out she was pregnant, just 6 months into their relationship, she cried. Victor didn't. He smiled. He hugged her, kissed her forehead, and told her it was destiny. That they were going to be a family. That this was God's plan for them. Within a week, he had bought a cheap silver ring from a downtown pawn shop and proposed. Not in a grand way, no speech, no dinner, just a simple, firm, let's do this. Madeline said yes. She called her mother, Denise, from the parking lot of a grocery store. She was trying to sound brave, but her voice shook. I'm gonna pause school for a little while. Just until the baby's older, she said. Denise was quiet on the other end. She didn't fight it. She just said, Come home if anything ever feels wrong. But Madeline wanted to prove she could do this. That this was her choice. That she wasn't just a girl in trouble, she was a woman building a future. They were married at the Pima County Clerk's office in early fall. No guests, no family. Just paperwork, a photo, and a cheap bouquet of gas station roses. Victor told her not to worry. This is just the beginning, he promised. To us. But not the kind she hoped for. With her education now on hold, Madeline spent most of her days in the apartment. She nested. She painted one wall of the nursery soft green. She read books on child development. She tried to remain hopeful. Victor, meanwhile, started changing. He stopped working regular shifts. Said he had plans in motion, investors for a food truck, permits in the works. But nothing ever materialized. Instead, he stayed home more. He began monitoring Madeline's phone, questioning every call, every message. When she asked about his past relationships, he dismissed them. They didn't understand me. They tried to control me. Soon, he began to speak about her family in the same way. He called them negative energy. Said they didn't believe in her. That they only wanted to drag her back to a small life in Albuquerque. He encouraged her to block her brother Bryce on Facebook after a minor disagreement. When she hesitated, Victor grew tense. Whose side are you on? One by one, Madeline's connections to her old life began to wither. Calls to home became shorter. She told her mother she was just tired. The baby was making her emotional. She'd call next week. Then next week. Then not at all. And then the monitoring turned to control. Victor began choosing her clothes. Don't wear that, he'd say. It attracts the wrong kind of attention. He controlled when she could go out, and with whom. You have everything you need here, he'd insist. Why would you want to go out with people who don't understand us? By the time their baby was born, a boy named Noah, healthy, 7 pounds 3 ounces, Madeline was no longer the same girl who had walked into that juice bar the year before. Her shoulders slumped. Her laughter quieted. Her eyes, once filled with spark, dulled. She loved Noah deeply. Being a mother gave her purpose. But the walls of their apartment felt tighter with each passing day. When Victor wasn't angry, he was withdrawn. Passive-aggressive. He refused to help with night feedings. He criticized how she held the baby, how she dressed him. Madeline began questioning herself. Maybe she was doing it all wrong. Maybe this was what being a wife and mother was. Surrender. Then, when Noah was barely 6 months old, Victor announced he was quitting the food truck dream. It's not the right time, he said. We'll figure it out later. He suggested they move further from campus, further from the people who kept interfering. They found a small 2-bedroom rental on the outskirts of Tucson, isolated, with poor cell signal. There, Madeline's isolation became complete. She couldn't finish school. She couldn't get a job. She couldn't even visit the grocery store without Victor's permission. And somehow, terrifyingly, she accepted it. She told herself, this is just a phase. Things will get better. He loves me. He's just stressed. But deep inside, in that last flickering part of her that still remembered who she used to be, Madeline Carter knew. This wasn't love. This was a cage. And she was running out of time. For a while, it seemed like Madeline Carter had found her way back to the light. It wasn't easy. Escaping someone like Victor Ramirez never is. But in late 2015, after nearly 5 years of psychological control, verbal degradation, and subtle isolation, Madeline finally made the call she had rehearsed in her head hundreds of times. Shaking, whispering, eyes darting to the hallway to make sure Victor wasn't home yet, she called her mother, Denise, back in Albuquerque. I need to come home, she said. I can't do this anymore. Within 48 hours, Denise was in Tucson with her youngest son Eli. They drove through the night and picked up Madeline and her 2 children, Noah, then 4, and Lena, just 2, in the parking lot of a grocery store. She brought only 1 suitcase. They never looked back. For a few months, Madeline lived back in her childhood home. Her parents helped her apply for full custody, and with the support of a local women's shelter in Albuquerque, she successfully secured primary placement of the children. The divorce was finalized in early 2016. Victor was awarded weekend visitation rights, but only under strict supervision. After nearly a year of rebuilding, Madeline applied for and was accepted into a certified nutrition program in Fresno, California, a city far enough away to start over, but close enough to maintain shared custody and occasional supervised visits with Victor, who had relocated to Bakersfield. By 2017, Madeline had changed. She'd grown stronger, quieter, but more certain. She'd stopped apologizing for her dreams. She was working part-time at a local clinic in Fresno, consulting families on affordable meal plans, while taking night classes to finish the degree she had once abandoned. Her children were thriving, and she slowly, bravely, was beginning to smile again. But while she worked to put herself back together, Victor Ramirez waited. He didn't stop calling. His messages, at first pleading, "Let's try again for the kids," eventually turned sharp. "You think you can erase me?" Sometimes he left voicemails in the middle of the night, slurred, mumbling. Other times, he'd send photos from years ago, family snapshots, with no caption. Just reminders. Warnings. Madeline never responded. She blocked him, changed her number, told friends she wasn't scared, but her hands still trembled when she locked the doors at night. Then came January 13, 2018. It was a cool Saturday morning in Fresno. The sky was overcast, the air still. Madeline had scheduled a half-day shift at the Fresno Health Collective, where she was training under a licensed dietitian. She left the kids with her mother, now living with her in a modest rental near Sunnyside. "I'll be back before 5, she said. "Then we'll go to church." That evening, they had planned to attend a memorial service for Madeline's grandmother, a tradition Denise held close. It was the kind of simple, sacred routine that had helped them stitch a sense of normalcy back into their lives. At 2:15 p.m., Madeline left the clinic and texted her mother, heading to pick up the kids from Victor's. She had agreed, reluctantly, to let him take them for the afternoon. It was part of the visitation agreement, renewed every 6 months through the family court in Fresno. She always dropped off and picked up the kids herself. Never stayed long. Never went inside. But this time, she didn't come back. At 5:30 p.m., Denise sat in the front pew of St. Jude's Parish, scanning the door with growing unease. She checked her phone. No messages, no missed calls. She texted again. "We're waiting inside. Are you okay?" No reply. By 6:15 p.m., she left the church and drove home, expecting to see the lights on, the kids maybe napping on the couch. But the house was still. Empty. The phone rang. Denise snatched it up, but it was her neighbor asking about a recipe. She hung up quickly and dialed Madeline. The line rang 5, 6, 7 times, then voicemail. She tried again. Then again. Still nothing. By 7:30 p.m., her comm had cracked. She called Victor. Straight to voicemail. She called again. And again. Finally, on the 6th attempt, the line picked up. "Victor?" she said, breath caught in her throat. The pause. Then his voice, cool, detached. "She came by. Picked up the kids. Left around 3. Denise blinked. "She's not home." Another pause. "Maybe she stopped somewhere. I don't know." It didn't add up. Madeline was meticulous. Predictable. She didn't make detours. She didn't ignore calls. Denise hung up and waited another hour. At 9 p.m., she drove to Victor's home in central Bakersfield, a 2-hour drive in silence. She knocked on the door. Victor answered, wearing a t-shirt and slippers. "She's not here," he said, eyes steady. "Like I told you, she left." "Where are the kids?" "They're asleep." "Let me see them." A tense moment. Then, finally, he relented. The children were inside, unharmed, sleepy-eyed and confused. But Madeline was nowhere to be found. Denise noticed scratches on Victor's forearm, raw, red, fresh. He shrugged. "Cat." They didn't have a cat. Denise turned around, got in her car, and drove straight to the Fresno Police Department. It was just after midnight. She filed a missing persons report. And just like that, Madeline Carter officially disappeared. What followed in the next 72 hours was a blur of dread and bureaucracy. The police, at first, were dismissive. "She's an adult," one officer told Denise. "Maybe she needed space." Denise slammed her hand on the counter. "She has 2 kids. She was supposed to be at Mass. She didn't just disappear." A detective promised to look into it. Then silence. So the family took matters into their own hands. They printed flyers with Madeline's photo, her soft smile, her warm brown eyes, the loose braid she always wore on clinic days. They plastered them across Fresno, Bakersfield, and beyond. They created a Facebook page. Local news stations aired her photo. A group of volunteers organized a search grid of local parks and roadside ditches. But no trace of her was ever found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, or more accurately, had been erased. And all eyes began to turn to the one man who wasn't looking for her at all. Victor Ramirez. By dawn on January 14th, the Carter family's world had already split wide open. Inside the small rental home in Fresno's Sunnyside district, Denise Carter stood in the kitchen, phone pressed tightly to her ear, surrounded by half-full coffee mugs, hastily scribbled notes, and a growing pile of missing persons flyers. She hadn't slept. Not a minute. She had gone from disbelief to panic, to something worse, clarity. Something was deeply wrong. Her daughter, Madeline, hadn't just run off. She hadn't needed space, as one officer lazily suggested. Madeline was a mother of 2, a nutritionist in training, and one of the most responsible people Denise had ever known. No, Madeline Carter hadn't walked away. Someone had made her disappear. But while Denise was ready to move heaven and earth to find her daughter, the authorities weren't. At the Fresno Police Department, the mood was flat. One detective shrugged, saying Madeline probably just needed a break and would turn up in a few days. When Denise insisted they investigate Victor Ramirez, she was met with tired eyes and procedural delays. "There's no evidence of foul play, ma'am," they repeated. "No sign of forced entry. No confirmed threats. We can't act on feelings." But Denise's instincts weren't feelings. They were alarm bells forged by a mother's intuition, sharp, relentless, and impossible to ignore. She knew Victor. She had seen the signs, the patterns. The way he isolated Madeline. The scratches on his arms. The cold tone in his voice when she called. The way he didn't ask a single question about her daughter's whereabouts. So, when the system dragged its feet, Denise moved on her own. She called Madeline's friends, former professors, co-workers at the Fresno Health Collective. She pulled up every photo, every voicemail, every last text her daughter had sent in the past month. Then she printed flyers, hundreds of them. Missing Madeline Carter. Age, 27. 5 feet 6 inches, brown hair, brown eyes. Last seen, January 13, 2018. Location, heading to ex-husband's residence in Bakersfield. By Monday morning, the flyers were everywhere. On lampposts, at gas stations, in community centers, taped to grocery store windows. Denise drove to Bakersfield herself and plastered the route with flyers. She went to Victor's neighborhood and slipped them under windshields. She knocked on doors. She talked to strangers. She didn't care about looking crazy. She only cared about one thing, bringing her daughter home. And something about her pain, so raw, so quiet, so persistent, struck a nerve with the community. By midweek, volunteers began showing up. First, a few neighbors. Then, co-workers from Madeline's clinic. Then dozens more, strangers who had read her story on Facebook, parents, students, even retired veterans who had lost someone once too. They formed search teams, mapped out parks and abandoned roads, checked bus stations and motels. They knocked on every door within a 10-mile radius of Victor's last known address. They went into alleyways, riverbeds, empty fields. They chanted her name. Madeline, Madeline, Madeline. They never found a shoe. A purse. A phone. Just silence. And Victor? He remained untouched. He stayed in Bakersfield, ran his taco stand every morning as if nothing had happened. When reporters from the local station KG-17 asked for comment, he declined. When volunteers marched with signs down his block, chanting, "Where is Madeline?" he stood behind the screen door of his duplex, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He didn't speak. He didn't search. He just waited. The police finally agreed to question him again. This time, he told them a slightly different story. She came to pick up the kids around 2, he said. Then said she was going to meet a friend. She didn't take the kids. Said she'd come back later. It contradicted his earlier version. But unless they could prove he was lying, unless they had evidence, their hands were tied. They asked if they could search his home. He refused. Without probable cause, the request died there. And so Denise turned to the public. On January 20th, exactly 1 week after her daughter vanished, she organized a silent march in downtown Fresno. Over 600 people showed up. They walked from City Hall to the courthouse, all holding candles and black and white portraits of Madeline. They didn't chant. They didn't scream. They just walked, slowly, powerfully, as if their collective silence could pierce the noise of bureaucracy. Reporters came. Cameras rolled. That night, #FindMadelineCarter trended in California. Still, no action. No warrant. No arrest. No answers. Then, on the morning of January 22nd, just after sunrise, the phone rang. It was a blocked number. Denise answered on the first ring. A man's voice. Distorted. He said 6 words. She's in Victor's kitchen. Check. Denise froze. Her hand began to shake. She called the detective on duty. He hesitated, but the sheer weight of the public pressure, the protests, the petitions, the news coverage, had finally pushed the department into action. That afternoon, with a team of 5 officers, they served a search warrant on Victor's home in Bakersfield. Victor wasn't there. But what they found inside would change everything. They had knocked before, twice. On both previous occasions, the officers stood at Victor Ramirez's door, clipboards in hand, badges visible, their questions simple, procedural. And each time, Victor answered the same way, calm, firm, composed. She came by, picked up the kids, left. No sign of stress. No stuttering. No panic. Just cold certainty. But this time was different. On the morning of January 22nd, after an anonymous tip sent chills down every spine at the precinct, a small team of officers returned, not with questions, but with a warrant. Victor wasn't home. It was just after 7 a.m. The air in Bakersfield was cool and still, with a faint orange haze from the sunrise creeping across rooftops. A single marked cruiser parked quietly out front. The street was still asleep. The officers knocked once. No answer. They knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Then, by protocol, they breached the door. The house was dark. Silent. Too silent. No radio. No TV. No footsteps. Just a faint hum from the refrigerator. It was a modest 1-story rental, beige carpet, walls painted pale yellow, a strong smell of cleaning solution thick in the air. Toys were scattered in the corner of the living room. A framed photo of Victor with the children hung crooked on the wall. At first glance, nothing seemed off. But as they moved toward the kitchen, that changed. The smell hit first. Not bleach. Not rot. Something heavier. Metallic. Wrong. An officer approached the stove, a gas range with 3 burners. On the front burner sat a large white enameled stock pot, lid tilted to the side. The stove was still warm. Inside were what appeared to be human remains. Arms. Legs. Both. Partially submerged in a dark, thick liquid. One officer stepped back, choking. Another vomited. A third immediately called it in. Possible dismemberment. Confirmed human tissue. We need forensic support. Now. It didn't stop there. In the refrigerator, where you'd expect groceries or takeout leftovers, officers found carefully wrapped bundles, each labeled in masking tape. Some marked with dates. Some not labeled at all. One bundle was unmistakably a torso. Another, a head, wrapped in butcher paper and duct tape. In a black trash bag near the pantry, they found pelvic bone fragments and hair. Bloodstains had seeped into the kitchen tile grout. Some areas had been bleached and scrubbed, but not well enough. This wasn't just murder. This wasn't even just dismemberment. It was something far more calculated. something inhuman. And then, the children. Officers found Noah, 6, and Lena, 4, in the back bedroom, curled under blankets, dazed but physically unharmed. A social worker later wrote that the children showed signs of extreme trauma, unblinking, mute, and withdrawn. When gently questioned, Noah reportedly said, "Daddy got mad. Mommy screamed. Then it got quiet." The authorities were forced to face the unimaginable. The children had witnessed everything. Victor Ramirez wasn't just a suspect. He was a monster. And now, he was gone. According to neighbors, Victor had left the house late the previous evening carrying a backpack and a small cooler. A local security camera showed him walking toward the Greyhound station, about 8 blocks away. By the time the search team arrived, he was already out of the city. Back in Fresno, Denise received the call just after noon. The officer on the line tried to be gentle. "We found your daughter," he said. But the words that followed, even with all the preparation, all the dread, crushed her. Denise collapsed in her kitchen, the phone still in her hand. Her screams, neighbors would later say, sounded like something from another world. That afternoon, the Bakersfield Police Department held an emergency press conference. The details were horrifying. Reporters gasped. Cameras zoomed in on the trembling hands of detectives as they read the findings. Across California, across the country, news outlets ran the headline. Mother found dismembered in ex-husband's home. Children may have witnessed killing. Social media exploded. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Hashtag justice for Madeline. Hashtag catch Victor Ramirez. And while the community mourned, the man responsible had simply vanished. That night, the Fresno Women's Coalition held a candlelight vigil outside the health clinic where Madeline worked. Over 800 people came. Denise stood in front, clutching a framed photo of her daughter. "My daughter didn't run away," she said, voice breaking. "She was taken. She was silenced. But I will not be." A week later, the coroner's report confirmed the worst. Madeline Carter had died from asphyxiation, likely smothered or strangled, before being dismembered. The cooking, investigators believed, was a failed attempt to destroy evidence. They couldn't determine exactly how long she had suffered. But the signs were clear. She had fought. Fought until her final breath. Victor's mother, Lucia Ramirez, who had occasionally helped him watch the kids, was arrested and held for questioning. But there was no conclusive evidence, not yet, linking her to the murder. The full scale of what Victor had done was almost too much to process. A mother of 2. A woman who had escaped abuse. Who rebuilt her life. Who helped others. And in the end, dismembered in her abuser's kitchen. This wasn't just a crime. It was a wound in the heart of the city. And a failure in the system meant to protect her. But it wasn't over. Because the man who did it was still out there. For most people, running away from murder is a desperate act. But for Victor Ramirez, it looked disturbingly calm. On the evening of January 21, 2018, just hours before the warrant to search his home in Bakersfield was executed, Victor was seen on surveillance footage walking, not running, toward the downtown Greyhound station. He wore a faded black hoodie, jeans, and carried a small duffel bag. No panic. No disguise. Just a man traveling light. That footage would be the last verified image of him for almost 4 years. The official manhunt began the very next day. The Fresno County District Attorney's Office issued a murder warrant. Victor Ramirez was now a fugitive, charged with one of the most gruesome domestic homicides in recent California history. His face was broadcast across state lines. Flyers were posted in shelters, clinics, DMV offices. His name was entered into every major criminal database, local, federal, and international. Interpol issued a red notice. Victor had officially become an international fugitive. But despite the media storm and public outrage, the trail ran cold, fast. Victor had no credit cards in his name, no driver's license renewals, no cell phone pings. It was as if he'd simply evaporated into the cracks of America. Then came the first tip. In late February 2018, a reported sighting near Tucson, Arizona. A bus driver thought he recognized him on an overnight route. But by the time authorities arrived, The bus had crossed into New Mexico. The man was gone. In March, another lead surfaced in El Paso, Texas. A homeless shelter volunteer claimed a man matching Victor's description had come in asking for food and shower access. Again, no proof. No photo. No name given. The man vanished into the streets. Months passed. Then years. But behind the scenes, the Carter family, especially Denise, never stopped searching. She kept a corkboard at home, covered in printouts, maps, timelines. Each pin marked a rumor. Each line connected the dots of her private grief-turned-investigation. Local activist groups joined the cause. Fresno Women's Collective, Justice for Survivors, Safe Streets Bakersfield. They organized marches, ran digital campaigns, even launched a podcast called Her Name Was Madeline. The show detailed the timeline of the crime and urged listeners to keep Victor's face alive in the public eye. They refused to let the case go cold. Meanwhile, back in Fresno, a trial still took place, not for Victor, but for his mother, Lucia Ramirez. She had been arrested for evidence tampering and obstruction. Though there wasn't conclusive proof she took part in the murder, her fingerprints were found on packaging materials. The court determined she had helped clean the scene and knowingly concealed the body. In December 2019, she was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But justice still felt incomplete, because the man who had taken so much still hadn't faced a courtroom. And then, finally, came the break no one expected. It was July 9, 2022, a routine day in Tijuana, California, just outside the U.S. Mexico border. Local tourist police responded to a call about a drunk man harassing street vendors near a bus terminal. When approached, the man provided ID under the name Maximo Herrera Garcia. The document was crude, laminated, with spelling errors. Something felt off. The officers brought him in for further questioning. He protested, belligerent and incoherent. But fingerprints told the real story. Within hours, the cross-border criminal database flagged a hit. Victor Ramirez, U.S. fugitive, charged with murder. The Tijuana officers froze. They had just stumbled across California's most wanted man. Victor was arrested on the spot and placed in a secure holding facility. His identity was confirmed by U.S. Marshals within 24 hours. By the end of the week, he was extradited to California under high-security transport. When Denise Carter received the call, she didn't cry. She just sat down and whispered, "They found him." The news spread like wildfire. Headlines read, Madeline Carter's killer captured after 4 years on the run. Tijuana arrest ends nationwide hunt. The internet, as it had done before, erupted. The Her Name Was Madeline podcast released a 3-hour special within 48 hours. Community murals were painted over with the word, "Caught." A petition was launched to name a domestic violence victims support center after Madeline. But while the world celebrated, the courtroom waited. Because Victor, even in chains, had one last game to play. He immediately fired his appointed public defender. Then requested another. Then another. Over the next 16 months, he delayed the trial 5 times, citing mental health reviews, representation issues, and procedural concerns. Denise showed up to every hearing. Sat in the front row. She never said a word to Victor. But she never looked away. Finally, the court ran out of patience. A trial date was set, November 2023. It would be a bench trial, no jury. Just facts. Just consequences. And for the first time in nearly 6 years, Denise Carter would get to watch the man who destroyed her family answer for every second of it. 6 years. That's how long it took. 6 birthdays. 6 Christmases. 6 anniversaries of the day Madeline Carter vanished without a trace. And then was found in the most unspeakable of ways. 6 years of press conferences, marches, posters fading in the rain. 6 years of Denise Carter standing outside courtrooms, watching other families find closure while hers stayed broken, unfinished. But now, finally, November 28, 2023, had arrived. And this time, Victor Ramirez was in the room. The courtroom in Denver County Superior Court was quiet, tense. A plain white wall, fluorescent lights, and wooden benches that felt far too small for the weight of everything about to happen. Victor sat at the defense table in a standard orange jumpsuit. His hair was longer now, streaked with gray. His face, still unreadable. No remorse. No visible fear. Just that same blank stare he'd worn on the night of his arrest. Denise sat in the front row. She didn't flinch when he entered. Didn't cry when they brought out the photographs. Didn't look away when the coroner described how her daughter's body had been discovered, labeled, sorted, hidden. Instead, she held a photograph of Madeline, smiling in her lab coat, a clipboard in one hand, standing in front of the Fresno Health Collective sign. The life she was supposed to live. The one Victor destroyed. The prosecution laid out every detail. The timeline. The motive. The phone records. The emails. The control. The threats. The autopsy. The anonymous tip. The fingerprints on the kitchen utensils. The trauma found in the children's drawings. The silence of a man who didn't report her missing. It was all there. Victor's defense team offered no denial. Only delay. They argued mental health. Unstable behavior. Childhood trauma. He broke down, they said. He wasn't in his right mind. But no one in that courtroom, not the judge, not the gallery, not the people watching online, believed that Victor had broken down. They believed he had planned, calculated, carried out every step of what he did with methodical cruelty. And the judge, the one person who mattered, agreed. At 3:27 p.m., after a short recess and a quiet return to the bench, the judge looked directly at Victor and read the sentence. Victor Manuel Ramirez, for the premeditated murder of Madeline Carter, this court hereby sentences you to 55 years in state prison without the possibility of parole. There was no cheer, no gasp, just the sound of Denise's breathing, shaky but steady, and the soft rustle of paper as reporters took notes for the evening broadcast. Victor didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't ask for mercy. He just stood when instructed, turned toward the side door, and disappeared out of sight, not into the streets this time, but into the custody of the very system he thought he had escaped. Later that night, Denise stood on the courthouse steps as microphones crowded around her. She didn't prepare a statement. She just said, "This wasn't justice. It was accountability. My daughter still isn't here. My grandchildren still have nightmares. But today, we know he won't hurt anyone else. That's something." She held up the same photo of Madeline and whispered into the crowd. Her name was Madeline. Don't forget her. The trial's conclusion sparked one final wave of response. Lawmakers in California began re-examining domestic violence case handling. Fresno's City Council announced the construction of a new family crisis center to be named the Madeline Carter Resource House. Victims' advocates cited her story in campaigns urging faster protective actions against abusers flagged by shelters. And in Albuquerque, where everything began, a small mural appeared on the side of the very health clinic Madeline once dreamed of running. It showed her holding a clipboard, standing in a field of sunflowers, children around her, smiling. At the bottom, through it, she chose healing, and we remember her strength. Madeline Carter's story is over, but her voice continues. In legislation, in awareness, in the quiet strength of those who fight, like her, to survive the shadows. This wasn't just a crime. It was a wake-up call. And maybe now, finally, the world is starting to listen.